They was not scared of Suge Knight. They was terrified of Suge Knight.
Right.
I mean, terrified.
I know.
No, to death.
To death. Wow.
What was Eminem saying during all this?
He was like, man,
oh shit.
It was like, this motherfucker's trying to kill us, man. What they trying to do? What do they want? I don't understand. What do they want? I say, hey, man, they want you to sign with them instead of being with Dre. But of course,
you guys knew that at the time?
No, that's what we found out that day. They told us that.
The 90s was perhaps the most dangerous time in hip-hop. We had real gangsters as MCs, gang violence was at its peak, we had the East Coast-West Coast rivalry, and every hood had its boogeyman. But despite all the strong figures in hip-hop, there was one name that everyone was scared of: Suge Knight. Suge's story is a tale of two extremes. On one end, you have the story of how a young man left football, then became a bodyguard, and then became a show promoter. Suge then moved up the ladder and began his own music production company before he eventually became the head of the biggest hip-hop label in the country. While on the other end is the story of a man who has gone from once having $100 million in his bank account to now having probably less than 20 grand in his bank account. If Suge had stuck strictly to his music business, by now he would probably be a billionaire with the likes of Jay and his former business partner, Dr. Dre. But Suge has simply never been able to stay out of trouble, and most times, if not every time, Suge created the chaos himself. You see, back in the early 1980s, Suge met a young Sharitha Lee at a party, and the two hit it off. The duo soon became high school sweethearts. Sharitha was a freshman when she met Suge, and the two dated throughout high school. However, Suge and Sharitha's relationship was just as topsy-turvy as a heavy metal music concert. In 1987, the Lovebirds began having problems. The situation became so crazy that Suge chopped off his girlfriend's ponytail in the streets. He was eventually charged with domestic assault, and Sharitha even got a restraining order against him. But still, Suge proposed to her 2 years later, and the two eventually got married. However, not everyone has been lucky enough to get or meet the romantic part of Sugar Bear. Yeah, Sugar Bear. In case you were wondering, that's the full meaning of the word Suge. Sounds so ironic, doesn't it? But let's get back to the 1980s. Just before Sugar Bear, okay, I think it's best we stick with Suge Knight. Before Suge Knight began Death Row Records in 1991, he ran a music production company called Nightlife. One of Suge's first clients was Mario Johnson. Johnson stated that he had helped write Vanilla Ice's massive hit, Ice Ice Baby. So Suge and his client wanted Vanilla Ice to pay them royalties for this song, but Vanilla Ice wasn't eager to share the Benjamins. Therefore, Suge had to fix the situation. He visited Vanilla Ice in his Beverly Hills hotel, and it was time to pay the boogeyman. He arrived with 6 men, and they roughed up Ice's entourage. Then, Suge took him to the balcony of the room and threatened to throw him off the 15th floor balcony.
Suge took me out on the balcony, started talking to me personally. On the balcony, high above, like 15 floors. He had me look over the edge, show me how high I was up there.
Were you scared?
I needed to wear a diaper on that day. I was very scared.
And what happened next? Let's just say Vanilla Ice decided that paying royalties to Mario Johnson wasn't a bad thing after all. A few years after this incident, Suge eventually began his own label, Death Row Records. But before Death Row would release any of its multi-platinum hits and classic albums, Suge needed money to start up the label. Suge allegedly got the money to start the label from a drug kingpin called Harry O. Harry O was allegedly the major financier of Death Row Records. However, he was also in prison during this period for running an 11-state cocaine trafficking empire that dealt directly with the Cali cartel. Therefore, Harry O could only use the phone for a very limited time, but during a recording session in 1992, Suge was having some problems talking to his business partner. Dr. Dre had invited 2 aspiring rappers, Linwood and George Stanley, to come for a recording session. So Linwood needed to make a call, and he picked up the closest phone. However, this phone was the one reserved for Harry O, because as I mentioned earlier, Harry O had limited telephone access. So Suge told Linwood not to use the phone. But my man Linwood doesn't take orders from anyone. He literally said to Suge, "Don't be coming at me with all that gangbang shit. I'm not from LA." Well, unfortunately for Linwood, Suge ironically responded with that gangbang shit. And with Suge Knight, you've got to realize that sometimes the truth can be stranger than fiction. So Suge pulled out a gun. Then he fired a warning shot into the walls of his own studio. Suge asked both rappers to strip to their underwear before he eventually beat both rappers to a pulp. He then took their IDs so that he could find them if they both went to the cops. And that's exactly what they did. Suge was sued by Linwood and George Stanley. But apart from calling his own Saul Goodman, Suge also had another trick up his sleeve. Rather than just trying to prove his supposed innocence, Suge decided to give the prosecuting attorney's daughter a recording deal. The attorney's daughter, Gina Longo, then became Death Row's only white recording artist. And Gina was truly a greenhorn. She was only 18 at the time and had never released a song or performed at a concert before signing to Death Row. Her father, Larry Longo, was eventually fired from the LA District Attorney's Office, and Suge eventually got off with a slap on the wrist. Suge showed once again that he had a unique way of handling business, and Suge's special way of doing business became hot topic again in 1995. You see, Suge was trying to expand his label and create Death Row East. He wanted to sign RZA to become the face of this new part of Death Row. However, he wasn't having it easy with RZA's manager, Happy David Walters. Happy Walters was a huge name in the hip-hop industry in the early to mid-90s, and he managed the likes of Cypress Hill and House of Pain, and he wasn't just going to let Suge Knight have his client. So Suge allegedly handled the problem in a manner that only Suge could. After some time, Happy Walters just went missing all of a sudden. He was taking money at an ATM in LA, and then he just disappeared. No one knew where he was. For 48 hours, Happy Walters was nowhere to be found. A missing report was filed, and he was found 2 days later. However, Happy was no longer the same man. He was dazed, covered in bruises, his head was shaved, and guess what? He was also covered in cigar burns. Now, who is always seen in almost every picture with a cigar? I'm not calling any names. Well, I'm just gonna say everyone believed it was Sugar Bear. And what makes this even more interesting is the fact that Happy Walters quickly let RZA out of his contract after the incident happened. He even stopped working with rappers and anyone in hip-hop after this. But this might not even be Suge Knight's most terrifying move. There are various reports that Suge had a supposed red room at the Death Row building. No, this room was definitely not for pleasure. This was where Suge allegedly beat anyone who pissed him off. And sometimes, Suge might even decide to make a person who crossed him drink urine. According to Death Row rapper Corrupt, Suge ruled the label with an iron fist, and for any error, there were dire consequences, like beating an employee before sitting on him in the bathroom, or making another employee drink the urine of everyone in the room. And unfortunately, his employees aren't the only people that Suge had reportedly done this to. Now you all know about the East Coast-West Coast rivalry. At the 1995 Death Row Christmas party, Bad Boy record promoter and Diddy's close friend, Mark Anthony Bell, was at the event to have some fun, but the night didn't exactly go well for him. Suge allegedly approached Anthony Bell and told him to give him Diddy's house address, but Bell refused. So Suge took him upstairs, and he and his goons utilized a more hands-on approach. They gave Bell the Death Row treatment. He was beaten with champagne bottles and then made to drink urine. Bell eventually reported the incident to the cops. Suge denied making him drink urine, but Bell eventually got a $600,000 settlement for the ordeal. However, Suge Knight eventually admitted that he made Mark Anthony Bell drink 20 shots of piss.
He might have got a few punches, and he probably drunk about 20 shots of piss. You know what I mean? Literally.